Week 13 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few kickers I look to start this week. The first guy, Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Harrison Butker, he was injured early in the season, but the last few weeks here, he's been putting up big numbers for fantasy owners. Week 10 versus Jacksonville 3, Week 11 at the Chargers 14, and Week 12 versus the Rams 14. And this week, an amazing matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals that give up the most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So Butker, I think he's over that injury 100%. He's getting opportunities with this Chiefs team. Obviously, one of the better offenses in the league. Going to be in the red zone a lot. And he's making the most of it, hitting all his field goals now. So right now, he's definitely a kicker I would start this week. And he probably will be in the top 5 in my rankings this week. The next guy, Cameron Dicker of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Cameron Dicker, he's been a good kicker, and he's hitting all his kicks so far this season. I know last week was a down week with only 5 fantasy points. But before that here, Week 9 at Atlanta, 8. Week 10 at San Francisco, 12. Week 11 versus the Chiefs, 10. Last week at Arizona in Week 12, 5. But this week here, a great matchup at the Las Vegas Raiders that obviously are prone to giving points. And this Charger offense is getting healthy with more weapons back. Keenan Allen was back last week once again for his second week in a row. Mike Williams, it's a possibility he could play in Sunday's ball game here for this Los Angeles Charger team. And Dicker's a kicker right now with confidence and who can put that ball right through the uprights from 50-plus range as well. So this could be a potential shootout with AFC opponents. And I like Dicker this week as a start. And he's still available in tons of fantasy leagues, over 75%. The next guy, Daniel Carlson, staying in the same game of the Las Vegas Raiders. Daniel Carlson, he's been money in the bank for the most part as a kicker this year here for this Raider team. And this is a good matchup versus the Chargers that give up the 5th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right here, Carlson, he was awesome in the beginning of the year. Then he hit a hiccup from Week 8 to Week 10. But the last couple weeks now, Week 11 at Denver 14. And last week, Week 12 at Seattle with 10 fantasy points. And right here with a potential shootout. And the Chargers giving up a lot of fantasy points to kickers. A bend but don't break type of unit. A little bit down there in the red zone here. I think Daniel Carlson is a decent possibility. He could get double-digit fantasy points this week again here. And I have him as a start. The next guy, Ryan Succop of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Succop and the Buck team last week gave him a few opportunities with the field goal range where he had 6 fantasy points. And he's got a great matchup here in Week 13 versus the Saints that give up the 3rd most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And going back to early in the season, he had 10 fantasy points in Week 2 with the same Saint team. So the last few weeks here for Succop, Week 9 versus the Rams 12, Week 10 versus Seattle 3, and Week 12 at Cleveland 6. So this week here, I think we'll see more opportunities out of him. The Saints and the Bucks, they always have tight ball games where a lot of field goal attempts are attempted by both teams. And I think Succop, he could score anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points. And he's a start this week. In the 5th and final kicker I look to starts Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. So he surprisingly had a very good season here as Myers. Still available in over 50% of fantasy leagues, surprising. And he's a top 5 scorer in fantasy points this season. So the last few weeks here for Myers, Week 9 at Arizona 8, Week 10 at Tampa Bay 6, and Week 12 versus the Raiders in that shootout, 10 fantasy points. So right here, Week 13, a good matchup at the Rams that give up the 7th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. It's an indoor game, obviously, in SoFi Stadium, which is always a plus, especially this late in the season here where all the weather, for the most part, on the East Coast is windy, rainy, or just crummy kicking conditions. So right here, Jason Myers, he's a kicker that's been getting the job done this season with 8 games with double-digit fantasy points. And this week here wouldn't surprise me once again if he does it for the 9th time. So that's a few kickers I have as starters for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.